Hello, good afternoon. We're going to get started. There's probably 3 or 4 people still who are struggling to get back in the building on such a beautiful sunny day. But we're going to get started. We have a kind of a full afternoon. I'm Vanessa Tierney. I'm from BAMSI. And BAMSI will be presenting this afternoon's training on community supports and coordination. So just to get a sense of who's in the room, care coordinators, you can raise your hands, mostly care coordinators, some nurses, 2 nurses, any clinical care managers, okay. And where's this table from? What organization?
Child and Family.
Child and Family. You guys?
High Point.
High Point?
High Point.
High Point? And
Bay State.
Bay State?
Bay State.
Bay State? It's a BAMSI table over there, I know that one. Okay, so we'll get started then. So a lot of the work that you're going to be doing, actually most of the work that you're going to be doing, is around coordinating care for the individuals that are referred. And so this afternoon's segment is really about what all of that means in terms of services available for folks, and we're going to spend some time on long-term services and supports. Joy will talk about that part, because even though this work is for behavioral health community partner, there's still an expectation that care coordinators will identify long-term service and support needs and help to access those resources on behalf of people and point them in the right direction. You may know that there are, across the state, as part of this mass health reform effort, both behavioral health community partners and long-term services and support community partners. BAMSI happens to be both. So we're with this group for behavioral health, and we're with another group based out of Worcester for long-term services and supports. So you may or may not know that this whole initiative is a 5-year demonstration project by Mass Health to reform the way services are provided to those at the most high-end service utilization in Mass Health. Mass Health spends $15 billion a year on healthcare services to individuals. And what their information shows is that 40% of those dollars are spent on 10% of the population. And that is the population that this demonstration project is intended to serve. So the promise of the program, the intent of the program, is to join together medical health needs and behavioral health needs so that individuals have sort of one approach to services, and everybody involved in their care kind of knows what's going on. As you know now, services are pretty segregated. So I know at BAMSI, if somebody shows up in an emergency department, we may know that within a few days, or we may never know that if they don't tell us. So the intent of this is to have really better coordinated care on both the medical side and the behavioral health side, frankly, to reduce cost, but also to improve health outcomes for individuals. We know the better coordinated care is for people, costs drop because people aren't so able to move around into different settings, and their health outcomes are improved if there are better transitions of care. And we'll talk about transitions of care in a minute. So the whole point of your job, from my perspective, is trying to determine the right care at the right place at the right time. Now people kind of go out on their own, and they, may see somebody in the hospital, they may show up in an emergency room, they get hospitalized for a few days. The social worker at the hospital tries to coordinate things for them, but once they leave the hospital setting, nobody really knows what happens. And so depending on the person's motivation and resources and ability to navigate what is a pretty challenging system to navigate, they may or may not end up back in the emergency department. We had our lists were sent out last week to our group on the referrals. There were over 3,000 referrals, and there's one person on the list that had, I think it's 157 emergency room visits in the last 18 months. So that's gives you an idea of some of the folks that you may be interacting with. I think on the BAMSI list there was, somebody with like 58 visits, 43 visits. So in an 18-month period, that's a lot of trips to the emergency department. So as you begin to coordinate care for folks, we would hope to see some decrease in those emergency room visits. And a lot of that is, on your shoulders to help coordinate the care and figure out what resources in the community will support tenure in the community, meaning longevity in the community, so people aren't always cycling in and out of more higher levels of care and showing up at emergency rooms or other settings. So it's important that you understand what's available and how to access those services. And so I'm going to just give an overview, and then Faith from our helpline program is here to talk about some community resources that are available. Joy will talk about long-term services and supports, which are other state-funded services that people are often eligible for. And we'll talk about how best to collaborate with other partners as you begin this journey of coordinating care for folks. So the whole process will begin for you around the social needs assessment. So once you have individuals referred to you, as you already know, part of what you'll be doing is a comprehensive assessment. And that's assuming that you can engage the person and have them agree to participate in the program, and they have the opportunity to opt out if they like. But assuming that you've been able to create an alliance with them and they are interested in continuing on, then you'll begin the process of comprehensive assessment. Now, evidence shows, this isn't my opinion, but evidence shows that individuals, when they're having a comprehensive assessment, tend to not be particularly honest. If you think of yourself, I know if I think of myself, when I go to the doctors and they say, oh, how often are you exercising? And I say, oh, 4 or 5 times a week. I maybe get a 4 or 5 times a week once every couple months. So it's human nature, in a way, to paint the best picture. So you'll have a better opportunity if you can really connect with the individual and build that trusting relationship where they feel safe, where they feel willing to share with you what's really happening with them. And through that process of comprehensive assessment, then you will identify some social needs for individuals. You'll identify what they already have in place, what's working for them, what may not be working for them, and then begin the process of coordinating care. So the social needs assessment will identify some social supports that are needed. And once you have consent, and you can begin a process of referring people and helping them navigate the system to get the resources that they need and to support them when you're not around, because you're going to be there very limited time. You have caseloads of 40 to 45 people, maybe checking in once a month, maybe more times during a time of crisis, but you're not their sole person. You are not the person who's providing care, you're simply the coordinator of their care. So care coordination, I would say, is more of an art than a science. And you'll try some things that will be very effective and people will buy in and it'll be helpful, and you're going to try some things that aren't going to be effective and aren't going to work, and that's just part of the journey. That doesn't mean that you're not doing a good job or you're not being effective, because it is an art. There's no magic formula when you're doing care coordination. So the other thing to pay attention to is when you get your referrals is there'll also be some other diagnoses that you'll uncover with the person, either through the comprehensive assessment. Depending on how much information you get at the time of referral, you may know some of that up front. And that will give you a little insight into either services that the person may already have or be eligible for. So for instance, if somebody has chronic heart disease, there are already services in the community that are available for people with chronic heart disease, or they're diabetic, or they're a smoker, or they have COPD. So when you look at those diagnoses, you want to kind of understand what's available for the person just based on their diagnosis. And then there'll be some other things that you'll help uncover that would be helpful to them from a social service aspect. So there are some sort of buckets, if you will, of service types. So one set of services are social and flexible supports. And you begin to identify what those needs are and prioritize them with the person. So it's important because buy-in will happen better if the person believes, the same as you, that a resource would be helpful for them. So you may identify a lot of needs, but with the individual you begin to prioritize what those needs are and then set out to identify what might be available for them. So once you know the greatest need, then you can begin to identify what is available. And these are just a list of some of the social and flexible supports that are available for people. And you'll learn about some of these. You'll also can find out from colleagues, from searching online, and there's a lot of resource available to help you understand where you might turn to in discovering some of these supports that are available. And most of you have probably worked in this business for a while and already know a bunch of supports and services that are available, so you can rely on your own experience. But what qualifies as social and flexible supports are transportation, housing support. Housing instability is a real concern for a lot of the folks that we will serve. What are their medication compliance needs? Are there some support groups? Again, as you do the comprehensive assessment and understand what some of the concerns are that they have, some of the issues. There may be some support groups that they can be hooked up with. There may be employment or education opportunities. There are employment services. There's educational programs. BAMSI operates a clubhouse and a recovery learning community. People may want to volunteer. So the idea is to get people connected as best you can, and they may need some specialized equipment. So those are the categories of social and flexible support. Then there are things called transitional services. Transitional services are really significant in this project because the transitions of care are the element of care coordination that is probably the most important in terms of success for individuals over the long term. As I said before, people go into the hospital, they get discharged, they have a discharge plan clearly when they leave, but their ability to follow through with that discharge plan is going to rely a lot on your connection with them. So if you are at their discharge planning meeting, there's an expectation and a hope that you'll be able to get to most of those. And if not, that you still connect with the healthcare providers, see what their discharge plan is, and begin to help identify some of those services. So there are these transitional services, and Joy will talk about some of these in more detail because some of them fall under long-term services and supports. But these services that are identified are all state-funded services. So there's a program called Money Follows the Person, there's nursing home transitions, transitional assistance for families with dependent children. It's possible somebody will be referred to you that has children. Home care assistance, personal care and homemaker services, and Veterans Independence Plus. So I'm just giving an overview of these classifications, and we'll talk a little bit more about them as we go through the afternoon. So if you think about your life and a time in your life where you have needed support, we all rely on support from other organizations, from other people. So I think it's important to recognize that these services are not any different than what we all need all the time. It's just that for the folks that are being referred to you, they may not have the resources and the capability to identify and put those things together for themselves. So can you think about for a moment a time in your life when you have needed to rely on some other kind of support, either through a period of transition or some other time? And would somebody like to share that example?
I'm in the process of relocating right now, and I'm relying on my mother
Mm-hmm.
to help to provide stability for me while I transition from New Hampshire.
Great. So that's relying on a family member. So that's a good example of bringing in natural supports. So part of the assessment will help to identify who may be available in the circle of individuals' lives that can provide some support to them. So those would be called natural supports. Any other examples that you can think of? Quiet crowd. Yeah.
So when I was finishing my master's, I had to quit my job to do the year-long internship,
Mhm.
and I had to rely on some DTA food stamps for me and my son while I was not working for that year.
Great. So there's another good example. So that's a resource that's available, state-funded resource that's available for people. So that's another type of service that could be available. So you get the point. We all need these kinds of supports through our lives. And so it's helpful, I think, when engaging with individuals to recognize that they're no different than you are. They're no different than family members who maybe need support at some time or another. So another classification of support is home and community diversion services, or what's called waiver services. And there are programs already that exist on the statewide basis for integrating services and providing coordination. And some of those fall into the category of acquired brain injury services for those that are not in residential programs. There's traumatic brain injury programs, frail elder support, senior care options, and programs for all-inclusive care to elderly, or PACE program. So those are, again, some home and community-based diversion services, and what diversion means is diverting people from a higher level of care. So to help people stay in the community, there are some other types of resources like that that may be available. BAMSI, for example, has a whole wide array of services for people with brain injury, acquired and traumatic brain injury. It's become specialty services of ours. So within your own organizations, you have expertise. And if you don't have it within your organization, you're all care coordinators on the same big team. So for instance, High Point, everybody knows High Point is a substance use disorder provider in large part. They do other things, but that's a big book of business for High Point. So if you work at BAMSI and you are care coordinating somebody who has had a lot of substance use issues, colleagues at High Point may be helpful. As a matter of fact, they could have spent time in a High Point program. And if you encounter somebody on your caseload that has brain injury, as example, BAMSI has a lot of experience in brain injury, so you could reach out to your colleagues in BAMSI for for ideas and information around brain injury. So I think it will be helpful for y'all to kind of know what each organization and others do that can be helpful. Then there's a bucket of services called community support and services, and these are the kinds of things we typically think of for individuals. These are the supports that are available in the community. So they're not necessarily state funded. They may be funded through grants and foundations. They may get some small part of state or federal funding. But these are recreational and leisure activities, your YMCA, those, all kinds of sports leagues and those kinds of things. There's dietary and nutrition programs, lots of smoking cessation programs, Faith-based organizations that often provide support to individuals have a lot of things going on in their community that may be helpful. There are legal and immigration services available for folks. A lot of cultural and language services available, so depending on the person's background and ethnic identity or cultural orientation, there may be services within their community that would be more appropriate than other services, so that's always a good place to look for linkages. And then the natural supports that we just mentioned a little bit ago are the supports that you find. There's this guy that I see every morning when I drive to work. I come into Brockton, and there's a Dunkin' Donuts at one of the intersections where I pass through, and there's always this guy he's always wearing a sport coat and has on a tie, and he's at the Dunkin' Donuts on that street corner. And so when I see him, I always think for him that is probably a natural support. He, I'm sure, knows the people that work there. I'm sure that they know him. He checks in every day, and I suspect if he didn't show up there, they would be concerned because he is faithfully there every day. And so that's like a natural support. So if there are, a convenience store on the corner or a coffee shop or some place that the individual frequents a lot, it's good to have a connection with them for you, because if you can't find the person, you go to contact them, you want to be in touch and you can't find them, knowing who those people are in their life is really important, because it will help you find them and support them when they drop off the radar, which they may well do. So knowing those natural supports and identifying all those supports, and that's again why this program is so valuable, is because it's that care coordination where you become the reciprocal of knowledge of what's happening in this person's life. Who's their primary care? Who's prescribing their medications? Are they getting some other in-home supports? Who are their neighbors? Where do they frequent? Do they go to a church? Are they connected to some organization? What are their interests? Knowing all of that will help you not only craft a good treatment plan for them, but will also help you when it's time to engage or re-engage an individual who maybe is no longer around. So as I said, BAMSI is a long-term services and supports community partner, and a lot of your work is around the behavioral health, because the folks that are being referred show up on that high end of utilization of behavioral health services. That's why they're being referred to us. But experience has shown that often people, this is a bias of mine, often people who get stuck in the behavioral health system, and you guys all know what I mean by that, cycle in and out of psychiatric placements, in and out of different outpatient clinics, have, behavioral health diagnoses as their number one diagnoses. But because we do a lot of long-term services and supports at BAMSI and also do mental health services, you would be surprised at the number of people who have long-term services and support needs that were never identified, because everybody thinks of them as being this mental health person. So I sort of challenge you a little bit to think broader than just the behavioral health domain, because people who have gotten really stuck in that behavioral health system, in part they're stuck there because we have providers have classified them, stigmatized them, and kept them there. So think more broadly. Think about what other needs they might have. That's where those medical diagnoses come in handy, and you all have nurses on your team who have expertise and knowledge around that. And there may be some indicator because somebody has diabetes. I was just listening to a program on TV last night about the impact of diabetes on the brain long term and how much it affects brain function. So what may be thought of as a behavioral health symptom, somebody's non-compliant, they don't have memory, that, these kind of issues, and we think that it's because they have this, they're having some kind of psychotic problem, when in fact it could be related to their diabetes. So again, knowing, thinking broadly about those things. And I know we have found in our work at BAMSI that a number of people who have behavioral issues have brain injuries. If you're somebody who has been in and out of addiction treatment, chances are you have a brain injury because of the likelihood of your brain being compromised time and time and time again. It affects brain function. And so it's important to be aware of those kinds of things, and your role is really integrating care, and that is again the promise of this program, is to try to begin to integrate that medical and social service domains so that we can kind of capture and holistically treat people rather than treat them in these segregated little pockets of their life. And if we're able to do that successfully, not only will people have improved health outcomes, but they're likely to stay in the community and thrive in the community rather than end up in long-term facilities. So if somebody does have a long-term service and support need, and those will be identified through the comprehensive assessment, then your role is to also include those in the treatment plan. So again, think broadly as you begin to do your work of care coordination. So I am going to turn things over to Joy, who's going to educate you on long-term services and supports.
All right. Try not to stand in front of the PowerPoint, how's that? But then you can't film that, so we can't be everything here. Is that all right? You're the filmer, right?
Yes, that's
Yeah.
okay. So
Okay.
if you wanna stand right there, you're perfect.
Okay, just because we were covering up the
Don't move.
PowerPoint. All right, I won't do a thing. Hi, my name's Joy, good to see you. I saw her ask him to turn down the heat or make it cooler in here, so good job. So we're happy with that. It's tough right after lunch to be so warm. I am gonna move around just so you know, so don't get comfortable with that.
Anywhere over there.
So I'm going to speak a little bit about long-term services. This is meant to be interactive. Please ask me questions. Some of these areas may be very foreign to people, and others of these areas you may be, oh yeah, I know all about that. So to Vanessa's point, you will have nurses on all your teams. We were just talking to a woman that we just hired who's our RN, who does do visiting nursing stuff. She's actually done it on behalf of some of BAMSI persons served who are going to be part of the behavioral BHCP, so it's kind of ironic. So you do have some built-in experts, so definitely look to them. So one of the requirements of training is that you all be trained in long-term services and supports. Long-term services and supports are really a kind of a catch-all area for people who have chronic needs and most cases physical disabilities. Now there are long-term services and supports that Mass Health actually pays for, that they want us to educate you on, and then there are other long-term services and supports that may be funded, like you maybe have heard about CBFS, community-based flexible supports in the DMH system. It's now migrating to adult clinical community services, similar type of thing where people are provided with residential, they could be provided with peer support, employment, living in their own homes. There can be other types of long-term services like residential homes, things that people probably have heard of. So it is helpful for you to have a little bit of background, understanding what some of those services might mean. You know, we did this presentation a couple weeks ago, and part of me thought, I don't know how much everybody's going to use all this, but then we got our list. And then we got our list, and then we realized 15 of BAMSI's people that are in our rehabilitation programs and in our residential programs were flagged on the list for behavioral health. And they have diagnosis of primarily developmental disability, some with autism, some with a brain injury. So if we had that many hits out of a list of 3,000 people, I guarantee you that you all are going to be referred people with those level of background. And I was able to look at the list of people, and I'm like, oh, yeah, I understand why this person hit it. And some of these people have some very significant cognitive challenges. Some of the people are quadriplegic. So this, I think, actually has more bearing on what y'all maybe think, because I do think these lists of people are far more mixed than what I thought they would be. So to be on the BHCP does not mean that you have a primary diagnosis that's mental health. It means that you are a heavy user of mental health services, behavioral health services, right? So it's a good distinction. So I'll give the example of one of the gentlemen I looked at. He's in one of our group homes. It's funded by Mass Rehab. He has a brain injury and he's quadriplegic. Yet he did not come up on the long-term services list for high use, but he came up on the behavioral health list. So if you think about that, if you've got somebody like that, how might you work with him and support him and his team? You can see how, if you're not familiar with that, that could be a fairly sizable challenge. So again, I think we have a lot of built-in expertise that we would actually say to you, definitely seek us out. We're here to help and support you. But again, this is why it's important that you know this information, because you may not realize who you actually are going to be encountering. The other piece I would emphasize is that it's not just the person that we're necessarily seeing, right? Because as Vanessa said, some people may be parents. Some people, I think of some of the people on our list as an example, people with a developmental disability who are going to a rehabilitation program. The people I saw are living with family members, most likely parents. So what kind of support do the parents need? You have an adult child that's having all these behavioral challenges, and yes, maybe they're going to a rehabilitation program funded by Mass Health, but what else might they need for resources? So it could be things like, do they need food stamps? Do they need housing? Are they having some mental health challenges themselves, dealing with this level of stress? So it's really thinking about more globally what's out there and available to people. So that being said, some areas of long-term services and supports, in general, we're talking about the Mass Health funded services. Those of you who are familiar with some of these that I'm going to mention the list, there have been some questions over time with people now being assigned an ACO. Is that going to make a difference in terms of their eligibility and what they can take advantage of? And the answer is no. On the state plan, which is basically the plan for anybody who's eligible to be able to use it, the process is still the same. So one of the things I did hand out to people, and I didn't make copies for everybody, but it is something that you can look at your table. It's the operational guide to services offered by Mass Health Office of Long-Term Services and Supports. When you look at it, I can tell you as someone who's pretty familiar with it, it's pretty daunting. So it wasn't meant to intimidate you. It really is a really comprehensive resource guide. And again, we can make sure that Melanie, who's the director of CCN, or Tasha, or somebody can send that out to everybody so you have it. But this is the actual guide that Mass Health puts out, and it's very, very specific. So the different categories I speak to, you can thumb through some of them and say, okay, what are some of the overall requirements? So if I'm making a recommendation, I'm not steering somebody wrong. Doesn't mean you have to be an expert. You're really looking at to say, this person might be eligible, how might I refer them? And again, I would recommend that you familiarize yourself with this to the greatest extent that you can. It is a little boring, so you might want to revisit it a few times. Or not, depends on if you need to fall asleep. So, some of the primary areas for long-term services are adult day health. I'm sure people have heard of some of these, right? I know some people, and I can guarantee you that some of the people on your caseloads will indeed go to adult day health or be eligible for adult day health. Adult foster care, continuous skilled nursing, visiting nursing coming in, right? Maybe also heard it as block nursing. Rehabilitation, like I just mentioned. There are, on our list alone, I think 13 people in our rehabilitation programs, and that's just Greater Brockton. Tells you more people statewide are eligible. Home health aide, PCA, personal care attendant, and then you have some of the adjunct services that would be things like durable medical equipment, walkers, canes, could be communication devices, could also be OT services, PT, speech and language, hospice, unfortunately, at that point in your life. People could be eligible for admittance into a nursing facility, rehab for short term. Again, you can here kind of see how those transitions can occur for people. You have to have a level of familiarity with it. I'm going to talk a little bit about each one, and again, you don't have to be an expert. Just sort of get it in principle. So adult day health is a day program for people with disabilities. It can be people who are elders, as well as people who have developmental disabilities, people who have behavioral health as a primary diagnosis, Although I will say a heavy percentage are people who are elders and a heavy percentage of people with dementia. But I can tell you from our own experience that we definitely have a decent population that are taking advantage of adult day health. You do have to have a medical need, some level of skilled nursing. It's, I'd say it's pretty loose though. You can have things like high blood pressure, diabetes. It doesn't have to be something super heavy duty. But they do an assessment to determine that people meet eligibility requirements. What's also nice about it is it's flexible in terms of the number of days a week that you go, and on top of it, you can get transportation provided for people. So if you had somebody that was interested in adult day health, you could refer them to a number of local adult day healths that they could seek out, or if they need more support from you, you can help make a call and sort of introduce them to the referral. The adult day health provider then would do an assessment of the person, and they have nurses that do that, and meet the person and decide if they would meet that level of care. If everybody was in agreement and Mass Health approved, then they can also assist to arrange Mass Health funded transportation. So you can see how if someone was kind of isolated or needed just as adjunct services to keep them sort of busy, it is goal-oriented, social in nature. It can really be, I think, a very supportive type of environment for people in the right circumstance, and they can manage people's medical needs, so that's the other piece too. If people have questions on things, definitely shoot your arm up, okay? Adult foster care. I think probably not as many people take advantage of this, but it is sort of a good thing to know. Again, this is a Mass Health funded program. In a little bit, I'm going to show you a website that actually gives you a really good background on all these categories. And behind all these categories, it gives you not only the definitions, but the eligibility criteria. And then there's also referral sources, so who are the providers of some of these. So you can connect people up directly with them. So again, you're not going to be assessing people whether or not they meet eligibility. You're assessing sort of maybe more globally if they're interested and could potentially need it. So there is some criteria though. So they can actually get adult foster care in their home or in a provider's home. I would say that the vast majority of the ones I'm aware are in a provider's home. And people need to have some level of support needed with physical care. It could even be with queuing. So reminders of how do you get to a shower, don't forget how you need to get dressed, that kind of thing. Or it could be physical care, so it's not just somebody who wants to live with somebody. And they also need some support around supervision. So it could be so you want someone who's pretty independent, but also may need some level of support. I don't see this one used that much, but it is a tool for people. And again, if you sort of hear, so the people I just described, some of them would be eligible for some of this. So it is helpful to know what that is. So really the key is that the people need support around at least one activity of daily living. And there's a definition of that up on the screen, but it really is around eating, bathing, bathroom use, ambulation, getting around, dressing, that kind of thing.
Joy, I think one restriction, isn't it, that it can't be your spouse?
Right. It
That's
can't.
one restriction.
Yes, there are restrictions. It
Yeah.
can't be family member. But
Or
you.
just the spouse, maybe.
Well, can it be a sibling?
I thought so,
Maybe.
but not.
I think it can be a live-in partner too, as long as you're not
Okay,
married.
okay.
It's a perfect idea, right? I don't know. We can look it up when we get there.
Yeah.
You guys get the book. Someone tell me. We're definitely not experts in this, and there's a reason why we turn some of these out. And also, over time, some of these things do change. I can tell you as an example, there's some information in here about dehabilitation. Well, there are new DayHab regs that are coming out for August 1st, and I suspect not all of this is completely up to date. So you do have to, continuously look back because things do change over time. The other thing that may be available to people is continuous skilled nursing, also known as block nursing. And as I said, we did mention we have someone who does some of that for us now. And people are eligible if they have a need for 2 or more continuous hours of nursing at a given period of block of time, or if nursing is needed for more than 30 skilled nursing visits in a 90-day period. So if you think about that, someone may need support around injecting their insulin. Someone may need support temporarily around wound care. So if someone's been in the hospital, someone's had some kind of surgery, or transitioning out of nursing facility, they need a level of wound care that their family can't provide. Again, a nurse may come in and do that. Nurses can come in and support people around not only administering insulin, although that's the primary one because things have become more restrictive.
There can't be a legally responsible relative, so no spouse or parent of a minor member.
There's your
There we
answer.
go.
We just found a new expert. Where are you located? No, I'm kidding. That's why you got to look it up.
Right.
And because the nuances do change, it makes it helpful. The thing with nursing services, again, if you go to some of the directories around home health support, visiting nurses, you'll find local resources in your area, and you can support someone to make a referral, either, again, directly themselves or with your help. And that home health agency will connect with that person and do an assessment, right? And determine what are their medical needs, what are their physical needs, and they will look at them kind of holistically around what are their nursing needs. Maybe do they need personal care support, home health aid support, and a variety of other things that could potentially go in there. So there are other things that can go in there, like homemaker and chore support and other things.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Does a medical person have to make that referral, or can we do it as the care coordinator, or do we need the nurse to do it? I
You-
know doctors usually
you can
refer
make-
to VNA,
You
so
can,
that's
you can call a VNA
Yeah.
and make a referral. They're gonna ask for some background,
Okay.
and then they're gonna determine, you know, if they think the person may be likely eligible, and then they will send somebody out, meaning a nurse, to actually do an assessment on the person. And so when they do the assessment on the person, they'll look at their medical diagnoses, obviously how they're, you know, physically, you know, ambulating, how they're physically caring for themselves. And so if someone's, say, eligible for PCA service, personal care, and you have someone with some significant cognitive and physical needs, they're gonna get right down to, it takes you 15 minutes to transfer, it takes you a half an hour to take a bath, how many, you know, minutes does it take to, for you to eat, and someone to, maybe in some
Food
cases,
shopping
feed you, and
and-
things
yeah,
like that.
and
So they look at all those things, and then they come up with ultimately a number for a week. So maybe they say 15 hours a week, you're eligible for services. They then obviously get that approved by Mass Health, personal care physician, right? And then maybe everybody's in agreement and everybody says, yay, that's right. 15 hours is the appropriate amount, or this number of skilled nursing is the appropriate amount. And then from there, people are hired, and there's different ways in which people are hired to provide the service. So in the example of the continuous nursing services, a visiting nurse or home health agency would hire someone, and that person would come out to that person for the amount of time that was appropriate. And they have to ongoing get approval. So they have to re-up every certain number of days. I don't know what it is. That's something that's always a moving target. That has changed a fair amount over time.
Thank you.
Nope. Rehabilitation. So in terms of rehabilitation, this is a, oh, yep.
Sorry, can I just ask a question about, in terms of the nursing care services, how does that come into play when the mental health symptoms are playing into the medical side of things? And what I mean when I say that is thinking about clients that maybe have a variety of health issues, don't have any supports, they're living alone, and kind of know what the directions are from the doctor. I'm thinking of an example of an individual who tends to use, he's had multiple sinus surgeries because he uses the nasal spray
Yep.
that you're only supposed to use for like 2 or 3 days, and then knows that he's not supposed to use it, but then uses it anyway and then goes to the emergency room out of kind of the anxiety of, oh, I know that I shouldn't do this and I can't breathe, so I use this. And thinking about nursing services, like that's an individual that kind of is a revolving door of going to the emergency room, but it's more his anxiety around his medical issues, not that they're not being managed by like a primary care provider and other, like he makes it to appointments. Is nursing care something?
I would suspect that would not be covered.
Okay.
I think it's really about people who don't have either the physical ability or the cognitive ability to administer a medication or care for themselves. So someone who maybe uses medication is not what that would be. Now, could it be if in an instance that someone maybe is diabetic and someone's trying to manage their sliding scale and can't figure it out and they need a higher level of care, but the attempt is there, but they cognitively are so confused they can't figure it out. That would be one thing. I would think that would be more of an abuse of a medication. Maybe not intentional, but it sounds like that person more than knows how to administer it. In fact, too much so, right?
Yes, and I guess the question really comes out of knowing that this system is in place to try and reduce emergency room visits and helping set up resources for individuals, like, and I'm using him, but there are plenty that struggle with the medical side of things, know what they need to do, but there's so much anxiety around, well, did I take my medication? Is it really gonna do what the doctor told me to do?
Right.
So I'm just gonna go, I took my medication like I'm supposed to, but I'm gonna go to the emergency room anyway, just in case something happens.
So I think in this instance, this would be a perfect example. I think you would go to your nurse to say, and to really work with the doctor. Now, I don't know all the detail, and I'm certainly not a nurse, let's be clear about that, around side effects of the medication, what are the implications if it's taken too much, too little, are there other alternatives, meds that can be given, why is the person on the meds to begin with, is it allergies, I think that's where you would come in with your clinical support team and your nursing, and work with the doctor and the whole team to figure out what may be the best course of action for somebody. So I think it wouldn't come from a traditional nursing coming in. It may be more around education, but also how do you divert somebody, and what other things can possibly be in that person's life to support them. So
utilizing the care team versus any other additional.
Well, I think you'd start there. I don't know enough about this circumstance, so I don't know why the person is even taking the medication and how long and all that, so it's complicated.
Yeah, I think Joy's right. I mean, it would start with, if I just think of those kind of, there's a lot of people with different scenarios that are complex, and that way is, starting with the care team, as Joy said, the nursing is particularly helpful in that domain to drill down to the particulars of that particular medication and the root cause and why the person's on it and what is it that they're getting out of it, because they keep doing it, obviously. And then the other thing that occurs to me, Joy's about to talk about dehabilitation. Is the person engaged in something meaningful in their life? What are they doing with their time so that they can have a more structured life and be in settings that might help support them around health and wellness coaching? That's part of what's included in this as well. I think one of your sessions is on health and wellness coaching. If you haven't already had it, you will. But is helping individuals to understand, of course, the implications of that kind of thing, using your skills around motivational interviewing, which is all around change, helping people identify how to create change in their lives. So I think in those kinds of situations, there's not a one-size-fits-all solution. It's really working with the team and approaching it from a lot of different places until you find some combination, that works. But I do think with somebody like that, to your point, wanting to impact the emergency visits is being an integral part of the discharge team if the person is admitted or shows up at the emergency department. And there is going to be some notification system It's a little gonna be clumsy in the beginning because it hasn't all been worked out with all the different medical groups, all the ACOs. But the intention is to have a notification so that when somebody shows up at an emergency department that's on your caseload, you'll know it. And you may be able to get up there and support them, and if you have a plan in place, kind of, help remind them of the plan and work with them right there in that setting to either reduce their time in the emergency department, possibly prevent a hospitalization, or if they have a hospitalization, knowing that they have somebody to coordinate with on discharge. So some of it is, that's one of those things that over time, you would hope to see improvement simply by the integration of the two things coming together, the medical and the behavioral health. That's how I think of it.
I used to work in the community, I still do. When you're, when there's any sort of mismanagement, I think it's always important to involve a visiting nurse association because they can determine what it is, because usually if they're on the inhalers, there are other medications that are involved they're probably not being compliant with. And they can come in for a very short period of time or however long they need. So just sort of giving them that extra support and doing ongoing teaching and just assessing their compliance, because it could be a variety of reasons that we won't be able to determine at that one visit.
Right.
So they can, provide that ongoing
So she's
support.
given you a perfect example. She's the BAMSI new RN on the team who has the perspective of actually working in that environment. So she, like probably the RNs on your teams, will have that level of background who could say, let me call over and talk to the nurse over there to see if this is something that might be eligible. Let me give a little bit of a background on the person. And I think that would be, to me, a great way that you would have an interactive piece because you would have that level of information and background that you could expedite or even make some recommendations around it.
Because Joe, you're right about the inhalers. They're not going to approve inhalers, but nurses are very creative about trying to get what they can get approved for the patients.
Right.
So they really are an advocate.
Right, and I think that's an excellent point that you raised, is as we go through these various pieces, as you call various programs or home health agencies, they really are trying to be helpful to you and helpful to the person, and they'll be upfront with you about what they think people may get approved for or may not get approved for, or they may say, well, let's give it a shot, let's see what does get approved for. So, I mean, they really are in the helping business, so hopefully you're not too intimidated by it. Just like, it's funny, Vanessa mentioned that we're also long-term services community partner, and I was with the long-term services community partner people yesterday, and we were talking about some of the behavioral health stuff, and they had the same look. They're like, what? Behavioral health? How would we know that? And so a lot of it's just, learning the other people's systems a little bit and realizing that people do use things across systems. So, rehabilitation. We're actually kind of an expert on rehabilitation. We have, I think, 10 DAHAB programs right now that we operate throughout Massachusetts. So if you really need any advice on rehabilitation, absolutely call us. But it is a Mass Health funded service, and people that are eligible are people who have intellectual disabilities. So that could be developmental disabilities like mental retardation, autism, some people with brain injury, some people with physical impairments, and that really is determined on what your challenge was really before the age of 22. And that's kind of the key. In order to have a developmental disability, you would have had to have your circumstance occur before you were 22. And that's why some of the people with brain injury become eligible. They could be 19 years old and have a brain injury, and you're not considered to be fully developed. Your brain is not actually fully developed until you are about 25. So, and then obviously the people with, mental retardation, that people clearly are aware of that at birth. And then, as you know, people with autism, usually, that 3, 4, 5, 6-year-old range, people have an idea. So it can vary. That's why they have the different life stages. Again, this is a Mass Health funded program. Typically, the programs are Monday through Friday, about 30 to 35 hours a week. Transportation can be provided through Mass Health funded transportation for people who have some level of involvement with the Department of Developmental Services. and some of these folks on the list absolutely do. They can also help arrange for transportation, and sometimes Department of Developmental Services sometimes pays for the transportation as well. So when people go to the program, they are really in a heavily structured environment that's goal-oriented. They have nursing available to them. They have speech, OT, physical therapy support available to them. And so it's really, I think, a really well-structured program. It's good to know this, even if the person you're referred doesn't necessarily have the need. Remember, somebody else in the house could have the need. And you think about it, if you're going out and you're meeting a single mother who has 2 kids, and one of the kids is an adult who is maybe eligible for rehabilitation, but is home and is really struggling and putting a lot of stress on the family, you can imagine if that person got placed, how the mother may be able to focus on the other adult or child with behavioral health needs. So you're kind of looking kind of more globally when you're thinking about that. Likewise, if you're thinking about somebody who maybe has young children, is the person eligible for a WIC? Are they pregnant? Do they have kids under 5? Do they have kids that maybe have early intervention needs? So early intervention needs would be from 0 to 3, right? So people with some level of developmental delay. So to be thinking kind of more globally about how we all experience stress, and the folks with the behavioral health challenges may not just be related to their own behavioral health. There are probably a lot of other stresses in their life, right? So, group adult foster care, I won't get into specifics about it, but it's similar to adult foster care in the sense that you need to still meet the same level of criteria. It just may mean that you may be with a small group of people living with a provider or a provider in the provider's family. I'm on film and I'm taking forever. Sorry, people. All right. You jump in if you think I can do this better. So you go ahead. You're the built-in expert. So we have, there's home health aid and PCAs. They're very similar services for people. My understanding of the difference with home health aid is that a home health aid is provided by the home health agency, and personal care attendant is actually somebody that a family member or the person themselves can manage that employee. So really the eligibility criteria is similar to adult foster care, and it's a lot of what we just talked about, right? People who need physical care for eating, dressing, meal preparation. It could be for medical appointments, transportation, therapy exercises, medication reminders. And staff are provided by the service agency, so right, the home health agency. Now, personal care is very similar, except that people can hire their own caregivers, right? Or family members can act on behalf of the person and be a surrogate and can hire their own caregivers. So there's a couple of restrictions. Again, it's the same thing with the spouse, guardian, or parent. But let's just say my sister lives 2 streets over. She's looking for a part-time job. She wants to help me take showers, go shopping, do all those things. I can sign her up to be my PCA. Now I have to keep track of her time that she uses, and I have to go through an agency that supports that to ensure that they do her query check, that we're not abusing the system, that she's properly trained. The whole idea is that you have control over who's coming in your home. Likewise, if you have somebody who's your dependent and they're eligible for PCAs, you as the parent or the sister or brother, whoever's living in the house, you can be the surrogate, and again, help hire for those positions and help manage that on behalf of the person. So it can work out really well for people who have somebody in their life and they're comfortable with. So it is a kind of a great adjunct service. And I think I mentioned some of the other things before, but again, so if you keep in mind that someone has, a chronic condition and a certain level of disabilities, they may need some ongoing support around a number of things. So we touched on transportation. People may need care coordination. Wonder what that is. That's what we're talking about, right? Could be homemaking services, right? Helping them around cleaning, maintaining their home, medication management that we just been talking about, laundry and chore services, meal prep, and then durable medical equipment. This is an area that I think people probably here probably have I think most of us think of canes, wheelchairs, walkers, right? But it can also be things like, your AFOs that somebody might wear on their legs, to keep the legs straight or provide extra support. It can also mean specialized communication devices. So you think about if someone is unable to speak, they could use a communication device. Some of those are very sophisticated. So some of the people I saw on our list for rehabilitation, some of them use some very sophisticated devices that really do voice output, and they can compose whole paragraphs. It's really quite fascinating. We have some people that use wheelchairs that they can drive on their own through infrared on their glasses. They can drive right through this building, and then you can say hello to them. What do you think about adjunct care services? And they can compose a whole thing by doing eye gaze. So some of the technology out there is phenomenal. And all those things I just talked about are all Mass Health covered services. So again, we're not expecting anybody here to come in and say, you need a Dynavox. We're not expecting that. We're thinking for you to come in if you encounter somebody who seems to have a high level of cognition, and maybe they're quadriplegic, that, gee, has anybody looked in on this on your behalf? And sort of how might you go about that? So, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go to a website that's actually been designed to help everybody. I'm going off camera, and everybody hates it. Doing it. And it's called Mass Options. And Mass Options, oh geez, not to panic, people. Oh, no thanks. I had trouble with this before, didn't I? No, that's not it. Just a minute.
I forget what we did last time.
Huh?
I forget what we did to get it close. Was it on the bottom right?
No, wait, maybe it was here. That's what I did. There we go. Okay. Anyway, so Mass Options is actually an awesome tool for people, and you guys should really be aware of it because I do think this is really helpful to you. Mass Options was created with funding through Executive Office of Health and Human Services for this very thing that we're talking about. And so there's a little bit in, I think, one of your handouts around Mass Options, but it's really easy in terms of the website to go to. It's actually a website that can be used on behalf of caregivers and on behalf of the person themselves. And what it is they have a toll-free number, and they actually have people available from, I believe it's 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., where you can actually go online and talk to somebody to get advice around a resource. And there is an easy way to connect with a specialist. You can do that by completing a referral, or you can actually call them. But where I see you guys, so you guys can refer people to this website, but I can also see that you guys can use this for your own education and resource. So if you go under the Finding Services, and I'll let you guys absolutely explore some of this stuff, you can see how many different areas there are. There's care management, there's caregiver supports, there's day services, there's food and nutrition, equipment and supplies. It's a whole bunch of areas. So there may be areas that you're not familiar with, or maybe areas that you know all kinds of stuff about. So then if I do something like personal care, you'll again see the definitions that we just talked about. And then when you click on things, you will you will see some of the eligibility. So if I do something like personal care attendant, there are some things behind it that you might find would be helpful. So you see where it says the PCA Consumer Handbook? Now, I gave you a very, very brief overview of what was involved, but this actually can guide the person and their family members into all the nuances of what you need to do for a consumer handbook and eligibility. And so as you go through some of this, and I'm not going through it all, but it gives you a whole bunch of different areas: who's eligible, how do you go about it, how do you document things, right? And again, you guys can go online and mess around with this. And then at the end, it has helpful phone numbers. So it gives you then where are the places to call in your local area. So as you can see, that can be helpful to people. So again, we're not going through it all, but just so you have a general idea of resources. Likewise, if you go to something like mental health, which is the area that we're most familiar with, you can read about the Children's Behavioral Health Initiative, the CBHI. Kids aren't eligible for this service, right? But they are eligible through community service agencies, and of which a number of us here are part of that. I know Bay State is, Child and Family is, and so is BAMSI. So actually our 3 agencies are collaborating around some projects around this. So we should know enough about this to realize at some point these kids age out, right? And then they may be referred to us, and or their parents may be referred to us. So it, again, we're partnering with ourselves within our own agencies and externally, right? Clubhouse services are DMH-funded services, right? So you have to have DMH funding to be eligible. BAMSI actually operates a clubhouse, but there are clubhouses throughout the whole state of Massachusetts, and they're in many different areas. And again, that gives you kind of a background on who funds it, and if you click on it, what the eligibility is. Community-based flexible supports I just talked about, right? BAMSI operates a large network of that, but again, there's community-based flexible supports, which will soon be the adult clinical community services. Those are operated throughout the whole state of Massachusetts. Again, you have day treatment. People may be eligible for day treatment. I guarantee you there will be people that are on your caseload or your co-worker's caseload that will be attending day treatment. They can be attending day treatment kind of on an ongoing basis, or maybe due to partial hospitalization. So you should be familiar with kind of, again, what that entails. A number of agencies here also provide day treatment. We do as well. Outpatient. So I'm not going through it all for you, but I think when you read through all this, everything that I see on this list, recovery learning community, BAMSI operates those. There's not one thing that's on this list that we collectively do not provide. We provide it all. So it's someone somewhere knows enough about this if you think it might be helpful. The other thing to know about this website, and I'm not going too crazy with it because I do think some of it's really helpful, is if you go under some of the other resources, you can see that there are search tools. Oops. And you can look down around disability information locators, Mass 211, and if you go to the index, you can actually, this is a little slow because it's here. You can actually select the town and the types of programs that you want. So if I went to program services, and I'm not going to do Raynham because that probably is not going to be that big, but I'll do maybe, I'm going to do Brockton because a lot of us know Brockton. Oops, going backwards. Oh no. And you go find, and I think some of you will recognize some of the programs are ones that we collectively operate. Hope Health, we know. Private duty nursing we're talking about, adult foster care. You could just go through the list of different types of things that are available to you. You see High Points there. Procter & Adult Day Health. So there's a lot. So, does anybody have any questions on any of this stuff? people find it too intimidating, if it's areas that you don't know, or do you feel like
That's good.
you got
Great
resources?
information, yeah.
Okay,
Lots
good,
of resources.
good. That's the whole idea. All right. Just trying to get you back, Faith. There we go. I think you're up next, Faith. I'm just trying to make sure I got it. Oops, I'm going backwards. Jeez. Scary, huh? Don't worry, I can find my car. All right.
Are people okay, or do you need a break?
Excuse me. I say they cool down the room a little bit. Starting to shiver over here.
Faith, just don't put it in front of the light bulb in a burn.
Okay, is that good? Where it
I
is? It's
think
not
so,
in front
yeah.
of it? Okay. Leave me this. Okay, Faith Frazier. I'm the director of the Helpline, which is an information and referral program. We basically try to help people find information on different services, on different resources for basic needs, that type of thing. And let's see if I can get this going. Okay, so basically our goal is to link those in need with services and supports. The phone calls are confidential. We have staff that are familiar with the different resources and where to refer people that are knowledgeable. And we can try to suggest any kind of solutions. We access a variety of resources, a lot of, through websites such as Joy's talking about. Are people familiar with 211, the statewide information and referral number where you just dial 211? Well, we're similar to that, it's just that we're local. As a matter of fact, the 211s were developed out of information and referral programs like the Helpline. So we just sort of know the local resources. Refer you to medical or mental health providers for shelter. So if you are working with someone and they are ending up, let's say they're being evicted from their apartment and they need shelter, we can let you know what shelter they might be eligible for, what the eligibility guidelines are, what the income guidelines are, and hopefully be able to give you that kind of information for furniture, childcare. So. We like to advertise ourselves as the one number to call when you don't know where to turn. Our number is 508-584-HELP. We're mostly familiar with resources in Greater Brockton, but we do cover, all of kind of Plymouth County and Southeast Mass. You can always check us because we may be able to refer you to other places in your locale that does similar things.
Can you mind to repeat the number, please?
It's 508-584, and it's 4357. Which is actually 584-HELP. So you can just remember HELP. I think AAA has the same thing, like 800-something HELP. That's the same number as ours. So we try to, like as far as housing goes, with questions on the eviction process, housing expenses, can your landlord charge, 3 months rent to move in? What are the, landlord-tenant responsibilities? We want to connect you with resources that can meet basic needs. That's really a lot of our emphasis. We know like the local food pantries, what days they're open. We have a list that we can give out to people on what days they're open, what their eligibility criteria is, that type of thing. We also can refer you to WIC and let you know. Now you can apply for WIC online. People don't realize that you can make your appointment online with WIC, which makes that a lot easier. WIC is Women, Infant, and Children, which is nutrition for young children. Housing expenses, we actually are a recipient of FEMA dollars. They actually refer to it now as EFSP, Emergency Food and Shelter Program, but you've heard of FEMA for emergency. So we're waiting now to get FEMA for Plymouth County, and we get money for rent that we're able to help people with the month's rent if they're in danger of being evicted, or a month's rent to move in a place. And again, we're waiting for that. It's June 21st. We may hear next month. It may not be till August. We're not sure, but we will be getting that type of thing. And maybe can refer people to like where FEMA is for Norfolk County, that type of thing. People call looking for apartments. We used to have a much larger housing department where we did housing search, we work with shelters and prevention. We've actually not doing those housing contracts anymore, but we have that information where we can refer people for answers on that. We can let you know where to apply for fuel assistance. Is everyone familiar with fuel assistance? You'd be surprised at the people that aren't. It never ceases to amaze me when, especially like now, this time of year, they're calling and the gas bills $2,000 and they're looking for help to avoid shut off, and they, really didn't know about fuel assistance. So if they're lucky, we have a little bit of funding now that we can help with it. We can talk to the gas company with them. So different, child care, mental health services, BAMC services, Parent Information Network, which is a program of BAMC's that supports parents who are living with children that have emotional disorders. So as far as housing help, I mentioned a lot of it already, but sometimes rent payment assistance, and other than FEMA emergency money, there's sometimes money through RAFT, the Residential Assistance for Families in Transition. Looks like some people are familiar with that. Veterans, always check and see if someone's a veteran. They may be eligible for some resources through the veterans. Refer you to shelter or domestic violence shelters. Information on the foreclosure process. You may be working with someone that's losing their own home, or the owner where they're in the home they rent is being foreclosed, and they have rights and they can really buy a lot of time, so you want to make sure they know that so they don't just go ahead and move out. Help with solving disputes with your landlord, and where to apply for affordable housing. Unfortunately, as you probably know well, the list is very long for any kind of public or subsidized housing, but at least you can apply and get on the list, feel like you're doing something. So food, applying for food stamps. We have a computer in our office. If people don't have computer access or internet access, they can come in and apply for food stamps online or make their WIC appointment, that type of thing. We are fortunate enough to get housing food vouchers from a private charity in Brockton, which we're able to help people with vouchers to shop at Shaw's. It's limited to Brockton residents only. That's the criteria of the charity, but it's nice when we're able to offer that. There's a meal site in Brockton, the Shelter and a Church offers hot meals. And then the Food Source Hotline is an 800 number from Project Bread that if you don't know where the food pantry is for your area, you just call there and they'll let you know, where the food pantry is, what their hours are, when they're open, that type of thing. Utilities, I mentioned that. Utilities are so big this time of year because this is when the utility companies can shut off. They can shut off as of April 1st after the winter, and by the time they give people notice and catch up with them, like we've been very busy with shut-offs. I've had a couple of calls this morning already of people that are in danger of having their utility shut off, and there are if you're under a certain income or on certain benefits like SNAP or Mass Health, fuel assistance, you do get a discount on your utility bills, the low income rate. If you're on a low income rate, you can avoid shut off with maybe 25% down on a payment plan over 12 months instead of, when they call and they say they want $500 because their bill's $1,000 and they're going to get shut off. Well, in speaking with them, we see that they're on the low income rate. We call National Grid with them, and so we can get them to prevent shut off with $250 now, and maybe we can help them with some of that $250. But it's easier to come up with $250 than it is $500, and then make the payment arrangement over 12 months of the different arrearage forgiveness programs that people for gas and lights. You can sometimes get some of your bill forgiven. It's once in a lifetime opportunity. So just having information on those kind of things. Being able to solve basic problems like that can let the folks concentrate on everything else that's going on in their lives right then. Let's see. So healthcare referrals to different healthcare needs and to insurance. We have a Mass Health counselor on staff. She's certified, so when people have questions on their Mass Health or how to apply or who's eligible, that type of thing, we can help answer questions. When you apply for Social Security disability, it's a long process and you're often, denied, and you have to appeal and go to a hearing, so refer you to people that specialize in that. I chair an emergency task force every fall in Brockton, which is with self-help and the mayor's office and people from elder services and the council on aging, just to kind of share information on any resources available so we can make sure to make that available to everyone. And we often participate in local resource fairs. there was a leadership conference a couple of Saturdays ago where people from different agencies provided information to families that attended the conference. Any questions so far? Good? Okay, so we're involved with Community Services of Greater Brockton, which is a group of agencies that meet in Brockton on a regular basis every month. The Emergency Food and Shelter Board, South Shore Regional Network to End Homelessness, United Way. I mention these just because by us being involved with other agencies like that, we can keep ahead of what might be available or different programs that are out or different resources and make that information available to people. Okay. We also receive funds from these different charities. Fortunately, the Helping Hands Fund through the, in the winter, the Brockton Enterprise, the different newspapers have a fund at Christmas. So like we're one of the agencies they give some of that money to. So when people call it Christmas looking, well, it's actually January by the time we get it. Usually, we help you with oil, with that type of thing. The Howard Fund is a fund for the aged in Brockton that we're lucky enough to get funds from. My Brother's Keeper, have people heard of them? On the South Shore, they're a big charity. They help people with furniture. They deliver it. It's impossible to get through to them if anyone's tried, but if you keep trying, you can get through. But they actually work with us on providing oil in the winter for people that don't have oil. Pilgrim Foundation, another charity, they give us the food vouchers and they give us a little money for utilities. Right now there's the Wales Home, which is for seniors in Brockton. Emergency Food and Shelter, that's for Plymouth County, and I believe every county does get FEMA, so I can try to direct you where in your county. I think like in Norfolk County, I think the Taunton Human Services Department administers that, so that type of thing, you can track that down. In Plymouth area, Interfaith Clergy makes donations periodically, and then like when people call the churches in Plymouth looking for help, they refer them to us because they figure we're kind of the clearinghouse. We can sort of determine if it's a need that they would be willing to help with. And another charitable trust that, we're lucky. And I will say, most of the money that we get through this is just money coming in and money going out. We don't get any admin fee on it, and BMC administers all of that and pays all the checks and stuff, but it's worth it to be able to have that available to people. Okay, where am I? All right, so here's just an example. There was Luis from Brockton. He came in, he's on disability, his limited income, he's basically on disability, and there's a language barrier. It was hard to understand him over the phone, so by coming in we could communicate better. Had 3 teenagers, electricity was shut off. So we were able to contact National Grid and help him call his doctor's office and get a letter stating that he had a serious illness and get that electricity restored without any money, luckily. That's because it had just been shut off like that day. Usually if it's a day or 2 you can get it back on. It's harder if it goes longer. But we know the ins and outs of things like that, and in this case, the fact that he was on disability means that he has some kind of serious illness, right? He wouldn't have qualified for disability without it. So even if you can't name you don't have to tell National Grid what it is. The doctor's letter just has to state that there's a serious medical condition and that a lack of electricity would be detrimental to the person. So just coordinating that, getting in touch with the doctor and getting that letter to National Grid, we were able to just cut through the chase and get that set. And then he was back, a couple weeks later with a gas shut off, and we were actually able to use the same method to keep his gas from being shut off. Nothing like no electricity to impact your health, I think, your mental health especially. A woman from Brockton needed to move out of a first floor apartment because she had a brace on her leg and it was getting too hard she needed a first floor apartment because she wasn't on the first floor. It was hard for her to get around, so we were able to call several property owners, and she was able to look at a couple of first floor units the next day. That was just a matter of timing, because if anybody's been looking for an apartment lately, it's pretty hard. Housing is really a crisis. It's hard because we can't always solve everything, but at least try and brainstorm with you of other solutions sometimes. And a senior that was behind rent, and she, her rent wasn't that much, she wasn't that far behind, and they had told her, they wanted the whole thing or nothing. But then when I was able to call them, maybe just hearing from someone from an agency, someone maybe of authority, they think, or whatever, they were willing to accept the partial payment we were offering, and working out with her, making a payment plan, and that ended up working out okay. So, if anybody had any questions, let me know. Feel free to call, even just to brainstorm again. I may not know your region, but I can refer you to who may know in your area. So, okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Everybody still okay? You want to breathe, okay? You just want to plow through so you can get outside, I know.
I don't blame you.
So, this segment is on collaboration and coordination. So the good news is, as you know from the last two presentations by Joy and Faith, that there's a lot of resource available for people. So your work at Care Coordination is in some ways made easier by the fact that you don't have to do it alone. There's places that you can call, there's websites you can go to, there's colleagues you can talk to, and the person most likely referred to you already has some amount of support in their life. And your role in trying to identify what those resources are and then help coordinate it so everybody's on the same page and not working at cross efforts, prioritizing in the same way, providing the same information to the person so that they understand. And because a lot of times for folks that have chronic mental health issues, are cycling in and out of the system, as I've said before, part of it is just a lot to navigate, and people need support, and they can get mixed messages. You can go to one doctor who says something, you go to your psychiatrist, they say something else, your neighbor is on some other kind of medication, now you think that's the medication you should be on. So all these things, help contribute to somebody getting misinformation, being confused, and so the collaboration is really an important component of what your work will be. So, of course, developing collaborative partnerships is going to be essential to your success. So the person may well have a lot of players in their life, family members, physicians, employers, landlords, all these folks that you encounter. If you just think about your own life, how many people you interact with or have as part of your life. So you're developing partnerships with those entities is really going to be important for success. You want people to know who you are and that your job is care coordination and that you're there to help and support the person. I emphasize the difference between the coordinator role and the provider role because some of you, I suspect, if not many of you, are coming out of a service delivery side of your organization, moving into a care coordination role, which are vastly different from each other. And as a service provider where you maybe work in a program where you're actually providing care and service to a person is different than coordinating their care, as I said before, because you have maybe 1-2 contacts a month, you have a caseload of 45, and so you're not going to be able to provide the service. So I just caution you around having clarity around your boundaries as a care coordinator, because you will get burned out really fast, you'll get overwhelmed, you'll feel some sense of failure because you can't do it all. So just remember that you're the coordinator and you're not the provider. So it's not your job to drive people around, it's not your job. I mean, you may have to, so I don't want to say you'll never provide transportation, but it's not your job to provide the transportation. It's not your job to go in and clean somebody's house or prepare their meal or do those kinds of things. You're really the coordinator, and I think being clear about that from the beginning, because it's a disservice to individuals if they think you're something that you're not, because when they'll be disappointed, and if you go back to what I said in the beginning around the trust, how important it is that you have an engaged, trusting relationship where people are going to reveal to you what their real issues are, what they really need help with, what they're really thinking about and struggling with. And if they misunderstand your relationship, that trust could be affected. So as you begin to coordinate care for individuals, it's going to be really important that you know what's the best communication method for those that you're interacting with. People like emails. Do they want text? Do they want you to call them? Do they want something in writing? So when you're communicating with the employer, the landlord, you know, if you're having to do that, or if you're helping the person to do that, because again, you're not doing all this stuff for people, you're empowering them to be able to do these things for themselves, but that's part of what you want them to know. Because if they're calling somebody 3 and 4 times a day because they, you know, want something attended to, and that isn't the best method, then that will be an obstacle for the individual. So helping them understand what's the best communication method. Having good contact information. You know, people come in and out of these positions, so you may have established a relationship with a particular person at a provider organization or at the doctor's office, and that person leaves. You want to find out who's the replacement, make sure you have the right contact information for folks, and know the best times to reach them. What's their preference? Again, your job in coordinating is to sort of be the, you know, the head of the team, if you will, and so having those knowing what that person prefers will make you have easier access, or the person that you're working with will have easier access as a result. Understand the scope of service and the expectations for the provider that you're working with. So we've talked about a whole bunch of services today. There are others that you're going to encounter yourself, and so you don't want to have a false understanding or expectation of what that service is, especially if you're explaining it to somebody else who may rely on it. So understanding the parameters of a service, what's provided, and what the role of that entity is, so that you don't confuse the individual, and so that you're clear about what they can and can't do. And most importantly, be reliable. You know, you're coordinating with a team. You're all in it together. Your role is to not replace anybody's job. There was a lot of concern, you know, amongst some providers as this rolled out. Some people may have case managers at other places. They may have a DMH case manager. They may have a case manager through their physician's practice. They may have a case manager at their HIV program. So there are other case managers that may be involved in the person's life, and right away it was like, oh, you know, are these care coordinators replacing us? No, you're not replacing anybody. Those are people you'll work with and work together with to maximize opportunity for the individual that you're serving. So some of those relationships that you'll cultivate, and this is not a complete list, of course, but these are some of them. Your best friend should be the ACO nurse case manager. Because again, this is around integrating care between the medical and behavioral health environments, and anybody who goes into a hospital has a nurse case manager. Chances are at their primary care physician there may be also a nurse case manager. So the likelihood of you contacting a physician directly, you know, you may get lucky and do that. You may establish some relationships over time that, you know, that allow you to do that, but mostly it's the nurse case manager that's going to be your entree to the doctor's understanding any of those medical elements to the person's treatment plan. The primary care physicians, you probably already know that certain things have to be signed off by the doctor. The treatment plan has to be that you're going to be designing. The treatment plan has to be signed off by a physician. And so each of the ACOs has established a contact person to do that. So you'll be informed about who those folks are, and that's who you'll be sending the treatment plans to get them signed off. And you want to know who those contact people are, because chances are you'll be getting back to them saying, I haven't gotten the treatment plan back yet, we need this treatment plan signed. So hopefully that'll get better over time as this becomes more integrated across the ACO setting. But you want to know those folks. You want to know who the medical specialists are, because again, as we said earlier, people are probably going to have multiple medical diagnoses, and they may have a variety of physicians in their life, not just a primary care doctor. All the community provider contacts that we've talked about, landlords. Faith talked about housing. Housing instability is a real issue for a lot of people. And knowing who their landlord is, developing a relationship. Often people, and I think Faith would attest to this, often landlords, employers, people that provide service to folks will be encouraged to know that there's a care coordinator in their life, because if there's somebody else they can contact rather than dealing directly with the person, sometimes that helps. Or they know they can reach out to you, or that you're going to be there to support the person and help them get what they need in order to stay in their home or stay in their job. ACCS staff, this mostly pertains to BAMSI, but it could pertain to others, is that any individual who is in an adult clinical community service program, former CBFS program, community-based flexible supports, ACCS program, anybody who is in ACCS is automatically eligible for this program. That means that they already have staff who are working with them, in some cases around the clock. Some of the ACCS programs are 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Some of them have nursing. I know many, BAMSIs do. So the nurses would be interacting with the nurse at the ACCS program, for example, especially around medication reconciliation. And so if they have those staff, you want to know who those staff are and develop rapport with them. The family and friends and all the natural supports might be helpful to know. And on your table is the handout that has the other behavioral health and long-term services and support providers in our area. Not that there was a, yes, I'm going to show that. So it's a page that has three pages with it. So that's a list, and the reason I included that is so that you know who else in our region, the southern region, is providing behavioral health community partner services, because part of what you also do is, or may have to do, is coordinated transition to another behavioral health provider. Individuals do have choice, and they may find out that one of the people that they know is being served by some other community partner, and they want to go get services there. So having an idea about who those other community partners are is important, because you may encounter them somewhere along the line. And then knowing your state agencies. This website that Joyce showed is a really useful website because it's put together by the Executive Office of Health and Human Services, but there are all of these state-funded agencies, so this can be an alphabet soup. So if you're not already familiar with all of the state agencies, depending on the individuals that you're working with, they may be engaged with these other state-funded departments and have, again, case management there or be engaged in it. So it'd be important for you to understand what each of those do. And that's the Executive Office of Elder Affairs, the Department of Mental Health, I think you probably all know, the Department of Developmental Services, there's a typo there, Joy talked about, so those are people with intellectual disabilities and autism. Department of Children and Families, DCF. Department of Public Health. Public Health provides a lot of community service, HIV case management. BAMSI operates as a DPH-funded program, WIC and early intervention that were discussed earlier, and other services. So DPH has a lot of community-based services. Mass Rehab. helps with employment. Mass Commission of the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. So again, remember when I said people may have some other diagnoses, so if somebody is deaf or hard of hearing, that's another whole department that provides services and supports that they may not have already accessed. The Commission for the Blind is the same. You don't have to be totally blind to get support from the Commission for the Blind. If somebody has a visual impairment that makes it difficult for them to see small print, for example, they have resources that can help with large print computers or telephones or those kinds of things that could really make a difference for a person. So those are important to know. And of course, your Mass Health ACOs, you'll all get to know because you'll be interacting with them fairly often. There are 17 across the state. There are probably 5 or 6 that you'll be interacting with regularly. The list that came out that we keep referring to was the list from Mass Health of all the people that are being referred to the CCN network. And all the ones that we expected to be represented were represented. Boston Medical Center is the ACO for Signature Health, for instance, the Brockton Hospital. There's Steward Health Choice, there's Partners, there's WellForce. Those are all the ones sort of in our area that people are assigned to. And those are the ones that you'll be interacting with a lot. So any questions on any of that? Any questions about anything we've talked about? Okay, so we're going to, because we have some time and I can't let you go too early, we're going to do a little interactive activity at your tables. And I'm going to pass around some sheet of resources. Oh, sorry.
One for